Fears about the threat of lone wolf terrorism. Will this be the new face of terror? And the rebel Maoist attacks on leaders of the Congress Party. How will India deal with its biggest internal security challenge so far? Hello and welcome to another edition of Insight. Osama bin Laden is dead. Al-Qaeda is now only a shadow of its former self, while the Taliban forces are on the retreat in Afghanistan. But that has not stopped extremists from carrying out their heinous acts. What's worrying is that they've carried out these attacks without the support of any organized terror group. In 2009, Major Nidal Malik Hassan shot fellow soldiers at Fort Hood, Texas, in protest against the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. A year later in Norway, a right-wing extremist, Anders Breivik, set off a bomb and massacred 79 youths attending a summer camp. And the most recent, two Chechen brothers blew up homemade bombs in Boston, killing 3 people, followed by the horrific public slaying of a soldier in London. All these give the impression that terrorism today has taken a different form. But what has really motivated these lone wolf terrorists to carry out such acts of violence? And how can countries protect themselves against such a threat? Grief and sorrow filled the air as hundreds gathered to pay tribute to 25-year-old Lee Rigby, a young soldier brutally and tragically cut down in his prime. He was murdered by Islamist extremists on his way to his military barracks in Woolwich, London. His shocking and untimely death has left his family members struggling to cope with the loss. Although Londoners have largely recovered from the terror attacks on the city's bus and subway network 8 years ago, the savage slaying of the British soldier has reopened old wounds in the society, prompting leaders to appeal for calm amid heightened anti-Muslim tensions.
We condemn the barbaric act that happened in Woolwich here in our area. This is clearly misrepresentation of Islam. If any, we condemn to the strongest terms possible, and we are very sorry.
This was not just an attack on Britain and on the British way of life. It was also a betrayal of Islam and of the Muslim communities who give so much to our country. There is nothing in Islam that justifies this truly dreadful act.
The assurance came as far-right English Defence League staged a 1,000-strong protest outside the Prime Minister's residence at London's Downing Street, smeared with anti-Muslim rhetoric. Mosques and Islamic cultural centres were also hit with petrol bombs by angry Londoners.
The Woolwich attack suggests that it's currently most likely a one-off incident. However, what I found really significant was the fact that the perpetrator deliberately wanted to ensure that the attack was ideologically legitimated and justified on camera, which meant that he wanted to see it go viral on YouTube. And the most likely reason for why he wanted to do that was essentially to, promote potential copycat attacks.
Michael Adebolajo, one of the 2 suspects, who was caught on camera waving a bloody meat cleaver shortly after the death of soldier Lee Rigby, has been linked to a Somalia-based terrorist group Al-Shabaab. He saw it as their moral duty to avenge Muslims who had been killed during the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, of which Britain had been a part of.
Youth are the most impressionable. When you mature, when you get old, you are not so much driven by global politics, by events, even at home. So youth want to change the world. They believe that they should make a difference. So naturally they get carried away by rhetoric, by propaganda, and also by some of the developments in those conflict zones, which is reality. But mostly it is propaganda, and I think that it is so important to prosecute those individuals who place extremist and terrorist material on the web.
The incident in Woolwich had to do with British government policies. According to the perpetrators, they wanted to blame the British government for participating in these interventions and interferences in what the perpetrators were calling our lands. And by that, they seemed to mean Muslim lands.
Gradually, the terror threat has now shifted from large-scale bombings to lone wolf-style attacks. The perpetrators may not have formal ties with any terrorist groups, such as Al-Qaeda or its affiliates, but they're nevertheless inspired by their extremist teachings to carry out acts of violence. The recent attack in Woolwich also came less than 2 months after the recent Boston marathon bombings by two brothers, Johar and Tamlan Tsarnaev, who killed 3 people and injured 264 others.
When I went to Boston 2 weeks ago, I visited the mosque where the older of the 2 Boston terrorists, he visited. He went to that mosque and had a fight in the mosque because the imam of the Boston mosque was very mainstream. In fact, the imam praised Martin Luther King, and Tamlin Sarnoff said, don't mention his name because he's not a Muslim. So Tamlin Sarnoff was driven by a very extreme ideology. So it is very important for those Muslim leaders to engage those young Muslims who are being influenced by propaganda and are deviating. If you do not counter and correct the misinterpretations and the misperceptions, then we will have terrorism.
What's equally worrying is that attacks of this kind are much harder to prevent compared to more complex plots that involve terrorist networks which provide training and funding. In November 2009, Nidal Malik Hassan, a US Army major, went on a shooting rampage at Fort Hood, Texas, killing 13 and wounding 29. His online communications with the late radical cleric Anwar al-Awlaki are widely acknowledged as the key factor which inspired him to engage in the shooting rampage.
You are only spending a lot of time with like-minded extremist individuals. It's very likely that given the additional factors such as the opportunity to get training in militant methods, as well as you meet other like-minded individuals who want to take that additional step of engaging in violence. There's every possibility that the additional step towards violence can be taken.
As the initial shock over the grisly killing of the British soldier gradually subsides, British society will be searching for answers on how to deal with desperate and disorganized young men who are more susceptible to religious extremism. During times of economic difficulty, the government simply can't afford to let the anger over the Woolwich incident boil over and affect inter-ethnic relations in the country.
I think the principal task of the Cameron government, as any government, is to calm tensions, to work to contain and soothe the passions, the anxieties, the heat. And if in time of economic difficulties, which Britain is in the middle of, a very long recession with no end in sight, and a lot of arguing about whether the government's policies are making the recession worse or turning the corner. So the government's task is to soothe everybody and exude confidence that everything can be worked out in a way that is inclusive of everybody.
A sold-out crowd filled the hall for Love Your Heart, Save Your Brain.